as we approach the Ardennes forest for the second half of the pre-holiday, pre-August break doubleheader. Welcome to our live stream. Looking back also, of course, at that amazing, astonishing, controversial Hungarian Grand Prix. But looking ahead, of course, as well to this weekend's Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, where last time I looked at the forecast, rain on Friday, dodgy Saturday, potentially sunny Sunday. Hard to believe, but anyway, maybe a bit of all three on every day. Who knows? But yeah, looking forward to obviously to Spa this weekend. Very different circuit from Hungaroring. And guess what tyres? Guess what compound Pirelli are running at the Belgian Grand Prix? Here I've got a nice graphic of it. Let's just have a look, just to remind you of the Pirelli compounds that we've had this year. So for Belgium, they're going for the sort of the mid-range for the soft, the medium and the hard tyre, whereas in Hungary they had the softest of the three. So softest on the right, hardest on the left there. Look at the last time we had that. Miami. Who won at Miami? Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Obviously you can't read too much into that, but there is a thing about cars sometimes just work really well on particular compounds, given the ambience, given all the changes. So anyway, McLaren won't be slow, that is for sure, around Spa. And the other times we've used it were China and Saudi Arabia. So yeah, they were max wins, weren't they? So interesting weekend looming. I've had quite a lot of messages today about what do I think about Max conceding that he should have gone to bed earlier for the Hungarian Grand Prix. He shouldn't have been doing his iRacing Spa 24 hours beforehand. And I said, yeah, right. I mean, if Max is, I think he's over 21, isn't he? I think he's won 3 World Championships now. I think he knows what he's doing. If people coming up to him now before the Belgian Grand Prix or after the Hungarian Grand Prix, whichever you want to look at it, and saying, oh, Max, did you stay up too late? Or if Helmut Marko even says that, what's Max going to say? So, oh, yeah, maybe I did. Yeah, all right, I'll go to bed a bit earlier. Yeah, right. He'll just do his thing. He's just going to say what he needs to say to stop people asking him these ridiculous questions. That's what I think anyway. Because he's a racer. And if he wants to do an iRace and that's going to relax him, that's what he wants to do, let him do it. Pete's sake, all this granny nanny state of when you got to go to bed now in Formula One. I remember talking to Mike Hailwood once, bloodshot eyes. I think it was the French Grand Prix. And Mike was quick. He was really quick. Fabulous racing driver too. And on bikes and cars, obviously, Mike the bike. And I said, how's it going, Mike? And he said, oh, yeah, good. I mean, I can't remember the last time I slept. That's the problem. I said, really? And he said, yeah, it's not that I'm up late. I just can't sleep. I try reading or doing this, just don't sleep. But he still drove beautifully. People are what they are. I mean, what did Margaret Thatcher had? What was it, 4 hours sleep a night or something? I remember. I know some of you will say, well, yeah, that explains everything. And a lot of you might say, well, that explains Max's irascibility in the Hungarian Grand Prix over the radio. Well, I would say, I wish Lando had a bit more of that. I was very wound up, as you all know, most of you know who are watching now, when I did that video after Hungary, and I haven't actually changed my mode. I've spoken, as one does, I've been on the phone a lot to a lot of F1 mates working for teams and so forth, and engineers and people like that. And it's interesting. It's about, I'd say, I don't want to exaggerate, but I'd say it's about 50-50 people agreeing with me or not agreeing with me. And those who don't agree think that I get it wrong when I talk about the first corner, that Oscar drove a perfect first corner, and Lando acknowledged that because he never mentioned there was any drama with Oscar at the first corner. And I reply, well, that just underlines how good a team player Lando is, and look at it again. And I've just been studying the videos of the restart of the 2023 Australian Grand Prix, when you'll recall right at the end, there's a 2-lap thrash at the end, and you'll recall that Carlos Sainz got a 5-second penalty for which affected his race result big time, for hitting Fernando Alonso, who was on his outside as they came out of the right-hander. And if you watch what Carlos Sainz does going into that first right-hander, a little bit like the first right-hander in Hungary, you could say, that it's a right-hander, tight corner, Carlos actually uses even less road than Oscar Piastri. He just stays right where he's supposed to be, and then he just sort of comes cross-track a little bit for the left, and Fernando happens to be there, and they touch, and because, because Carlos is on the inside and because the rule book says that you've got to give the guy on the outside room these days. He's the one that got the penalty, which I still think to this day was one of the most ridiculous penalties ever issued in Formula One. And I use that in the context of what Oscar did on the first corner in Hungary. I mean, he ran much wider than Carlos Sainz did going into that first corner, and he knew he had the full pack to his left of him. Why would he have known that? Because it was the first lap of the race, and there's no way, and of course he would have known that Lando was there. And I don't see the difference. If they'd touched, I suspect it would have been Oscar that had got the penalty, not Lando, because he's on the outside. That's the rule these days. They didn't touch because Lando actually gave Oscar a lot of room once he started to slide at the front. And Max then didn't touch Lando because he then went off track on the left. And my contention is that if the track is wide enough for it to be three abreast, which it is there on that first corner in Hungary. As I said, in the build-up to the race, it's a very, very wide first corner. That's why Max was never getting proper short corner return going into that corner. It's a very wide corner. And it makes no difference whether it's a car to your immediate left or the car on his left in terms of, is somebody inconvenienced by you running wide in the first corner and using too much road. It was Max Verstappen. So if you take Lando out of it and you say, right, Oscar ran wide, as a result, Max Verstappen, who was enough room for him to be where he was. Normally that's a 2-car width bit of road. It was 3 in turn 1. He had to go off track to avoid him. So that would have been a penalty as well, I think. And yet there was no mention of it, no penalty at all. And that's an important point, because in everything I've been saying about that race, it was, if there was some sort of agreement at McLaren before the race as to how this would go in terms of who should win the race, given circumstances that may or may not arise, then all bets would have been off after what Lando did in that first corner, because he did a massive favour, I think, for Oscar Piastri by moving to the left and giving him room and not having any sort of shunt. Really good move by Lando. And then looking at all the data, it's pretty clear that it's all related to, as I said at the time, to the undercut, and obviously to Lando getting an advantage in that undercut. And the reason they did the undercut, I suspect, I'm only guessing here because we don't know the precise details, but I'm guessing it's because they wanted to cover Lewis Hamilton, who'd come in early at the beginning in the first stint, and then obviously following that had come in relatively early for his second stint and his second run on hard tyres. And as is normally the way, probably pre-race, you discuss what would happen in that situation if you've got 2 cars there, you've got a lead car and a trail car, if you want to call it that. The trail car would be the one that you would then use to cover that potential threat, in this case the Lewis Hamilton threat. And that was obviously Lando, and they brought him in. We're talking about 2 laps difference. I think it was 2 laps difference between the two in terms of the so-called undercut. And as a result of that, and as a result of Lando coming out ahead of Oscar, he then had to give the position back. Presumably, I'm guessing now, because they said before the race, look, if we do that, we're going to have to cover. But if you lose position as a result of that, or you gain position, you're going to have to give it back to whoever it is in front. Personally, I think McLaren executed. I mean, once they'd made that decision, I suppose you can't fault McLaren for wanting to enforce the decision, because it would be chaotic even more if they didn't, because that's what they decided to do. And I think now the only thing I'd really watered down is when I said, the threat, the implied threat was, if you don't do this, Lando, or if you want us behind you for the championship, you have to do this now. The implication being that if you don't do it now, you won't have him behind us. And I think what that adds up to, I've been thinking about this long and hard, is probably in a similar situation in a future race, if there's an undercut thing going on and Lando happens to lose the lead, in that situation, if Lando didn't give the lead back to Oscar and it was reversed, then Oscar wouldn't give the lead back to Lando. But I think, I would say this. I mean, I think we've all got used in Formula One, haven't we, sometimes to seeing 2 cars in the same team. Alpine seem to do it a lot. When they end up with 20 laps to go, they've got a car in front they want to catch, or they got pressure from behind, one or the other, and their 2 cars are on the same compound, but maybe one's got fresher tyres by a factor of about 5 laps, and they're going a bit quicker, and they're held up behind the teammate. And often we see in Formula One now is, okay, swap positions, and if you can't, and if Daniel or whoever it is can't make any impression on so-and-so, he will give the position back on the last lap of the race. And we've kind of accepted that's okay. But bear in mind, they're all running nose to tail, and there's not that much margin, there's not that much room for error in that. But if you look at the numbers of where McLaren were, their so-called lead over Lewis Hamilton, that's not the right word, lead, really. I mean, they're running 1-2. And if you look at the numbers here, prior to it all, Lewis was relatively close to them. And I think it's playing with fire for a team to start using an undercut and all the things that can happen in an undercut, from a driver having a terrible in-lap, a driver having a terrible out-lap, a problem in the pit stop, all those factors coming in and saying, oh, well, if he does the undercut and he's got the advantage, he must give the position back. Because so many variables come into play in an undercut. And the lead that they had over Lewis wasn't comfortable enough for them to be playing around with anyway. I think that was kind of what Lando was saying on the radio, or trying to say. It didn't have much success. And I say that in the context of, and don't switch off here because you think this is an old guy talking about old days, because it's no different. It's absolutely no different in terms of the human essence of this. The 81 Brazilian Grand Prix, which famously Carlos Reutemann won because he famously ignored the pit signal from Williams, which consistently said Jones-Reut, in other words, swap positions as per your contract. You're the number 2 driver and you have to finish behind Alan Jones. Well, the details of that, I don't know how many people are aware of it. The details of that is that Carlos's contract said that if both Williamses are running 1-2, forget the order at the moment, and at least 12 seconds ahead of the third place car, and if Carlos is in the number 1 car and he's leading Alan Jones by less than 4.5 seconds, he has to give the position back. Pretty complicated, but not actually that complicated. Basically what they're saying is they've got to have a big margin over the P3 car because they're going to be faffing around a bit. And secondly, that Carlos, if he's under pressure from Alan, it's quite clear that Alan could, at least go as quickly, if not quicker. And what happened in that race is that was exactly where Carlos was. Alan was. He was exactly within 5 seconds of Carlos Reutemann, and he was more than 12 seconds ahead of, I don't know who it was, maybe Nelson Piquet, who was on the pole and decided to go for slicks on a day when it just rained and rained and rained. And he ignored it. And he got a lot of stick afterwards, obviously. And Alan, the relationship after that completely broke down. But when I had dinner with Carlos a few days later and I was talking to him about it, I said, well, what were you thinking at that point? Were you just thinking, oh, I've had enough of this finishing second to Alan? And he said, no, it wasn't that at all. He said, they didn't give me the pit signals for the gap over Alan. If I'd known that he was 4.5 seconds behind, I couldn't see anything because of the rain. I could have gone a second a lap quicker, 2 seconds a lap quicker. I could have been leading him by 10 seconds after 4 laps. So why should I have to give him the lead when they haven't given me that information? I thought, well, it's it's something I didn't write into his contract, and he's got a good point. And then I said, well, even so, it's disrupted the team. And he said, well, maybe it's disrupted the team. That's not how Carlos was. He's maybe disrupt team, but Peter, you think back Long Beach Grand Prix, which was the race before, which Alan won, but Carlos had been leading with Alan putting pressure on him. Not pressure, but just running behind him. And the general story is that Carlos was coming up to lap a car and got a little bit on the marbles, as a result of which Alan was able to zip through. And I said, did Long Beach have anything to do with this, Carlos? And he looked at me and said, of course, because no way I let anybody pass in that situation. I have no problem with the car. It's very easy for me just to stay in front of Alan, but I let Alan go because I think it's the correct thing to do. And what upset me afterwards, he never say thank you, and nor the team say thank you. And I thought, wow, I can kind of see how it all built up then towards Brazil. And I make all that point, and I tell that story because of all the aggravation that can arise if you start trying to exercise team orders, of the complication of McLarens in Hungary. And some people out there may disagree. I'm sure there are race engineers and strategists out there in the, but I think if you start bringing in undercuts as part of the team policy of who should win a race, that is playing with fire, because there are so many variables. And we saw one of them. We saw Oscar Piastri running wide. It didn't make any difference in terms of the actual positioning and the number of seconds behind or in front, as it turned out. But it could have, you know, if you lose 6 seconds because you go off and you've got an agreement about this undercut thing, you could think, oh well, he's going to give me the lead, doesn't really matter. I mean, that's where I say there are too many variables in play if you start using the undercut as part of your driver policy, and who's to win and who shouldn't. And then as an overall picture, I still haven't changed my view. You know, that was when Max Verstappen woke up on Monday morning, he thought, well, you know, I finished fifth, not very good, at least I finished. How many points is it for fifth? 10 points. But Lando didn't get the 7 points he should have got for winning that race. So that's a bit of a bonus. That effectively gives me 17 points. It's like finishing second or third in that race. I mean, that's what McLaren did. They basically took 7 points away from Lando Norris, and 7 points could be critical in the World Championship as it gets tight, as they keep talking about the World Championship. Okay, maybe Oscar Piastri is going to have more points than Lando at the end of the year. Maybe. And maybe I'm going to be wrong about that. But to me, there were a lot of things that I still feel quite strongly about that. And as you can tell. Anyway, there we go. Let me have a look now at some of your questions. Or shall I ramble on a bit more? I think I can ramble on a bit more. I'll tell you why. Because there was an FIA... I always dread these FIA meetings when they happen, because you'd really never... I'm just trying to get myself sorted with the question box at the moment, sorry. You always dread these FIA things, and they're going to change the regulations or change this or change that. And I thought it was actually quite good that the FIA actually announced yesterday there will be no change to the point scoring system for a while. Well, yeah, why change it yet again? Good, that's good news. For 2025... you can be 2 kilos heavier as a driver now. You don't have to be 80 kilos, you can be 82 kilos, which means that the driver car weight now is 800 kilos. Seriously heavy Grand Prix car. Much heavier than my road car. Much heavier than my road car. Yeah, I'm saying it again. Can you believe it? And in 2026, good to see there'll be 9 test days. Well, they need that, completely new cars and power units. And as for the 26 regulations, they're going to be meeting again on October 17, which happens to be the Thursday of the World Rally Championship round in Europe. I'm sure most people will be thinking the Thursday of the American Grand Prix in Austin. But anyway, I like to give the WRC a good plug whenever I can. So, yeah, on the Thursday of Austin, there'll be more news, in theory, about the 26 regulations, more detailed news. So, yeah, that's that. Okay, no more ado now. I will start to... Oh, I've got some super chats have come up. That's very nice. Sergio Garcia. Well, he's actually under... Here's a question. Okay, let's have a look. Why is that not coming up now? Anyway, Sergio Garcia, who's asked a super chat question: why do you blame so much Oscar for understeering on turn 1, but have always said that the inside driver really owns the corner? Well, I absolutely, totally, you know, if this was a thing in isolation, I'd be congratulating the stewards for not penalising Oscar Piastri. Absolutely. But the problem is, what's happened to all the other drivers who have got penalties? And the regulations haven't changed. And what we saw yesterday is how it should be all the time. The guy on the inside should be able to understeer a little bit and get away with it, as we just saw. But it isn't what we've seen in all these other races. And I keep referring to the 2023 Australian Grand Prix restart and Paul Carlos Sainz, you know, who drove an impeccable braking in first corner into that restart and gets a penalty. So on that's why I keep talking about it, because, you know, yeah, I'm the first to say, if it's going to be like that, next year change the regulations so that you can do exactly what Oscar did. But they aren't the regulations right now. I don't get that. So that's why I'm upset and wound up about it. And there's another super chat up here. As ever, my whole chat box seems to have completely blown up. I was talking to my guys about all this at the beginning of after the last show, actually, and they said get rid of that chat box you have, Peter, because it's too annoying. Let me see if it comes up now. Oh, I know what's happened. I know what's happened here. Just going to get it sorted. 1 second. There you go. How about that? Good. No, I've lost the chat box. Apart from that, everything's good. So bring it down there. Go back here. It's so annoying, all this stuff, isn't it? I keep saying to my manager, why can't it just be simple? Just press a button and bring the thing up. Can't be that difficult. So anyway, I hope I've answered that question, Sergio. But thanks for asking it. I mean, the bottom line is he did do exactly what I think a guy on the inside should be allowed to do. It's just that we've had so many penalties. And this was the first corner of the first lap with the whole field there. And if that hadn't been Lando on his outside, if that had been, I don't know, Max or Sergio Perez or Yuki Tsunoda, to name just a couple, or Kevin Magnussen, do you think it would have given him the room that Lando gave him? No chance. John McLaren, talking about the McLaren, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, fracas, good name. Anyway, John, Lando's race engineer is shocking. If you listen to Tom Stallard and Oscar, it's night and day. Do you think it happens if Zach's there? Love the show. Thank you. Well, as I keep saying, to me, engineers, they're so miscast now. There's so many different personalities on the pit wall that come under the heading of engineer, performance engineer, this engineer, that engineer. And I'm always loath to criticize individual engineers because they're such clever guys, and I'm an idiot most of the time. I mean, they know stuff that I couldn't even begin to dream about, and so I'm not going to go too far down that road. But I do think that there's a lot of stuff that you hear on the radio now that should have been talked about before the race started. And I made a comment, I don't know, it was last year, I think, when Lewis pulled away from the dummy grid. Might have been Barcelona, I think, and he said something like, "Oh, there's more grip here than I thought," or the outside doesn't look as clean as it should be, or something like that. And I just thought, isn't that the sort of thing they should be doing their homework with on Sunday morning, doing what Ayrton Senna used to do, and go out there early Sunday morning, look at the grip levels, look at this, look at that. I'm sure there are probably regulations stopping them doing too much, but there seems to be a lot of stuff. And what are they all talking about on the grid anyway? You see them doing that national anthem thing, and the national anthem, and they walk back to their cars, and then they're talking to their race engineer who's got a clipboard or something, and they're all going, yeah, and they're nodding their head, and as if there shouldn't be anything to say at that point. I wouldn't have thought. You should have done, all the talking should be over. Maybe it's start procedure stuff to do with the clutch input they've had, but even so, I mean, you'd imagine that would be fairly much talked about and thought through before the start, before they get in the car in the first place. There just seems to be, given how professional Formula One is, and given how much engineering and technology is involved, it seems very, very rough and ready sometimes. And as we saw with McLaren, that whole airing of their dirty washing in the middle of the race like that. Not only them, Red Bull as well with Max, obviously. And I just think engineers, I mean, David Brown, I still say is one of the best race engineers that I ever worked with. He was Nigel's race engineer in '92, and he knew exactly when to speak, when not to speak, and how much to say if he wanted to say it. And Nigel respected him for that. And all these, Ferrari question. This is a question, Charles, so don't get too annoyed. It's only a question. What do you think about this? It's still going on. That you can tell that Charles at some point has thrown a wobbly because he doesn't know if it's a question or a statement or a rhetorical question, and so it goes on. And I come back to my point. The whole business of being an engineer seems to have kind of outgrown itself, and I just wish they would ban radios. To be honest, I think they should. I know it's good for the TV, but I just think they should. Just like I think Lando should just stop all social media and become as hard as nails and live inside his own bubble of fearlessness and just get on with it. I think we should ban all that stuff because it's too much rubbish. And actually, if you think about it, it would have been quite good if they hadn't had the radio with the McLaren thing. They would have been doing the old Jones-Royt thing, wouldn't they? Holding out the pit board saying, Pia Nor, and Lando would go wow, like this, head turned the other way. With the radio, it's a bit difficult because even if he says, can't hear you, there's enough telemetry to show that the radio is working perfectly, thank you very much. So it's probably why I didn't do any of that stuff. So there you go. Now I'm just trying to get back to square one with this whole chat palaver. So Sujith, hi Peter, do you have any info on the fuel in 26? Is Formula One getting one single fuel supplier, or are the teams bringing the sustainable fuel from their own sponsors and suppliers like Shell for Ferrari? No, I mean, if you read through the FIA, I understand why you're asking that question, Sujith, because if you read through the FIA spiel about the 26 regs, they don't talk about fuel anymore. Have you noticed that? It's all like energy providers and energy. Yeah, okay. And so you're not allowed to talk about fuel. It's too bad for the environment to talk about fuel now, even to talk about it. So they got this, as you say, this incredible sustainable fuel formulation, and that's limits on this, limits on that, the toluene, the methane, and all that stuff, and it's pretty strict. But my understanding, talking to all the fuel guys in the pit lane and the engine guys, is that there's still a reasonable amount that you can do with the recipe and do something different from the Oppo. So yeah, I think you'll see certainly the big players, even though the FIA thing says, Aramco doing this thing, and Saudi Arabia and Spain, they're making it in Spain. Good stuff. Good for Spain. Even though they're saying that, then I think there's a phrase, something along the lines of, but other energy suppliers may want to be involved, or something like that. So I can't remember the exact wording, but anyway, basically Shell, ExxonMobil, all the serious players will be doing their own thing for sure. And the good news is, chatting to them players, they seem to think there's enough room there to have enough variation to come up with something a bit trick anyway. Let's put it that way. Sujith finishes. Does this also mean we'll see a fuel war? Well, yeah, in that there will still be differences between Shell fuel and ExxonMobil fuel, or the standard Aramco fuel that they say will be using. So yeah, I think there could well be. Another super chat up here, thank you. Octay Yilmaz, is that right? How about I pronounce that, Octay? Oops, I haven't got that yet. I haven't got it up yet. Okay. Octay. Here we go. Hi, Peter. Okay, except I don't like Hamilton. But is it not weird to you that he suddenly said, "I did not steer, and it was a racing incident"? Very suspicious to me. You're talking about the Hamilton Verstappen thing. I don't know. I have to say, Octay, I didn't really take that much notice of that, because it was for third place, and I thought, well, I already had decided that was going to end in tears, and I was thinking Lewis is so good in defence, as he always is, and Max is so wound up about his day that for sure there's going to be something, and I was focusing on something else, and I haven't really studied it too much, so I'm not doing a very good job answering that. I don't like Hamilton. But isn't it weird to you that he suddenly said, "I didn't steer"? Okay. So he's saying that it wasn't Max's fault, is what you're saying, which sounds like it could have been Lewis's fault. I don't know. I mean, when it's all that stuff with DRS involved, I'm so what am I, bemused by DRS and speed differentials and how it actually makes the overtaking more difficult in some cases, as we saw in Hungary. That and I just try not to get involved, really. To me, that was, if you're coming from behind, the onus is on you to do a clean pass, but Max looks like he locked up big time, so it's probably his fault, isn't it? Or not? Am I missing something? Another super chat, I think, if I can get it to work. It won't click. Okay, another one. I'll come back to that one. Sarosh Soman. Hi, Peter. I thought Leclerc had a good race. Watching his onboards, looks like he was able to find a good rhythm. I think, not an expert on the week that he gets agitated. He just needs to be guided. Yeah, he did. I mean, he obviously, it's amazing, isn't it? The minute he's got Sainz behind him, he's a different driver. I think there was that. He got past Sainz and all that early first lap drama. Not caused by Oscar Piastri at all. And then he had a very good, clean race, and he was quite quick. I'm not sure Ferrari got absolutely the maximum. I think a bit sort of shell-shocked that he was where he was. But he was good, wasn't he? He was good right till the end of the race and drove well. I mean, he's had such a difficult last couple of months since Monaco, really, that, it's almost like Sergio Perez, once he'd re-signed for Red Bull, just sort of went into neutral and hasn't done much since. And it's almost a bit like that with Charles at Monaco. So, well, I've done this, I've won the Monaco Grand Prix. I've done it on top of the mountain. And it's kind of like nobody can tell me what to do now. And I'm not going to, I know all the answers. And all I want is a good car. And I think when the car's very edgy, which the Ferrari has been now since Imola, really, I guess. Because they had upgrades at Imola and more in Barcelona. When the Ferrari's edgy, he's finding it very difficult because he wants to be this guy on the top of the mountain, and he's just riding all those dramas that the car's throwing at him on medium and high speed corners, and making mistakes as a result. I mean, that mistake coming out of turn 4 on Friday in Hungary. I mean, what was that all about? He was just too quick, wasn't he? And just lost it. And he's done that a lot over the last couple of years for sure. And he's done things similar to that over the last few months. And it's a difficult thing. And whereas when the car's been difficult, Carlos Sainz has come into his own, and he's found his own little bubble of operation and done a really good job. So I don't know. It's a bit like Sergio Perez, I think. I mean, obviously, I put Leclerc in a totally different class to Perez, but I think there's a similar thing going on, which is that they don't really, well, you get to a certain achievement level, and they don't really listen anymore. And that's the beauty of Max, Lewis, particularly, that they are very self-critical all the time. And that's why they are as good as they are right now, because they've continued to develop and improve as time has gone on. Because they are self-critical. Very, very difficult to do that. So the second part to your question there, Sarosh, he just needs to be guided to drive the car, and he would naturally figure out in getting the best from the car. Such a natural driver, he should be able to easily figure out ways to get the best and not get emotional. Your views? Well, he does get emotional too, and that is the thing. And I just get the feeling that he's got a lot of good people around him, but he's not benefiting from that. And that can only mean that he's not listening that much to them. And it's difficult to get guys who don't want to listen. It's another question from Sarash. I'll make this your last. Peter, generally, do drivers in FP1 drive in a reactive and spiky way to understand the limits of the vehicle? I see that Leclerc does that quite often. FP2, he seems quite settled. I haven't seen Max. No, they don't. If you're seeing that, it's not necessarily driving in a spiky way. It's sometimes pushing a limit that you may not push if you're doing a fuel run in FP2 or FP3, for example, or you're in the race. But on Friday, you wouldn't drive differently, and Max wouldn't drive differently on a Friday. He's still got that lovely soft approach, and his transitions are very soft and seamless and beautiful to watch. But he might, for example, push a tyre a bit harder than he would in normal circumstances, just to see how far he can go with it. So I've got this, here we know. Another super chat's just come up. This is the one I couldn't get up before. This is Octo Yilmaz again. So who do you think Spa winning? Saturday seems rainy. Max 10-place grid penalty. To me, a surprise. Leclerc or Russell win. Yeah, I mean, people in the wet. When it is, I mean, at the moment we're talking about a dry race. It looks like a dry race at Spa. And Spa's not that difficult to overtake, on a circuit on which to overtake. So if you're going to have a penalty at Spa, it's not as injurious as having a penalty at Hungary. So that's the first thing. So, Max is capable of winning the Belgian Grand Prix, as is Sergio Perez. And I say that because I think the car will go well there. Even if Perez doesn't qualify that well, if it's wet on Saturday, he's still quite capable of winning it from where he might be. And you got to, on the law of averages now, you got to assume he won't have yet another shunt. I just hope not. I think he'd be quite good. I think Ferrari, I mean, on the face of it, Ferrari have got to be struggling on the medium high-speed corners there. And McLaren are going to be really, really good again. So you'd have to say, I haven't included Mercedes there. It's going to be close between Mercedes and McLaren, George and Lewis. Well, George will possibly work the tyres a bit harder than he should, maybe, and Lewis will be a bit better on tyre management. And I think overall the McLaren will probably have the better package, bearing in mind Spa is about compromise. It's sector 2 is, if you've got a lot of downforce, it's a great sector to be running downforce. Sectors 1 and 3, you don't want a lot of downforce. So you'll see some teams going one way and some the other. And McLaren are not bad in a straight line. Mercedes are not bad, but when they take wing out of the car, they tend to have more tyre deg than McLaren. That's what I would say just from the last few races. And Ferrari, Ferrari's problem is they got bouncing again on the medium high-speed corners, and to get rid of the bouncing, they had to run quite a lot of downforce, and then they lose their top speed and they lose all the other stuff. So they may be struggling. So I don't know. We'll see. Obviously, it's when you've got a wet qualifying and a dry race, it's normally really, really interesting. not so much at Spa, because you can do a lot of overtaking at Spa, assuming you get through the first corner shunt, of course. It's less sauce. I say shunt because I'm assuming if you're in the midfield, that's where it might be. Felix, another super chat. After the 2020 Austrian Grand Prix, you said that Lando had Lewis-like early turn-in and short corners. What made you change your mind about him? I'm not sure I ever did. In my mind, I've always said that Lando's had incredible Lewis-like touch and feel, but his issue has always been that his corners are too long. They're longer than Lewis's, longer than Max's, longer than Oscar Piastri's. And I remember noticing that for the first time, interestingly, at the Austrian Grand Prix, which is the race you mentioned. So I think you need to, either I misspoke or you misheard, one of the two. But I remember saying, was it as long ago as 2020? Maybe it was. I remember saying, wow, you could really see there for the first time the difference between Lando and Lewis, how much longer Lando's corners are. He's turning in much later than Lewis. So apologies if I misspoke there, but I don't think I did. That's in my mind, and I've always said that ever since that moment in Austria. So sorry about that, Felix. So we've done that other super chat. Okay, back to square one. I'm trying to be organised, trying to be efficient with this, and it's kind of going okay now, I think, isn't it, this thing? Carlos Freid, in the last Grand Prix, McLaren proved that Formula One needs a pit stop team for each driver. Yeah. Did we have that at one point? I'm just trying to remember. Did we have that when we had refueling? I think we did. I should know that. I think we did. We didn't have as many guys on the car, or guys and girls on each car, though, do we? Because we have a lot of people on the car. So that's a lot of people. Budget cap, alarm. Yeah. Well, also, the last Grand Prix, you're saying that. What about Silverstone? You could argue that Oscar might have had a totally acceptable gripe after Silverstone that he wasn't stacked and he had to do that extra lap. I personally, as I said at the time, I don't think that is fair comment, because I think in a race where the conditions are changing and have changed, and it's a bit frenetic in that sense, and you've got two cars close together, a stacked pit stop is asking for trouble. Now, as it happened, Lando had the trouble anyway, but I don't think that was. A lot of people have said, oh, well, after what happened to Oscar at Silverstone, this is poetic justice. I think that's stretching it a bit, to be honest, but anyway. Michael Lawless, I was very surprised to see the stewards say Lewis could have done more to avoid the collision while Max was dive bombing the apex. Am I wrong? Well, I wish, the problem is, and I've been saying this over and over and again, and I said it a million times after Austria, the problem is DRS. And, these words come in, dive bombing is something that comes up from the driver in front, oh, he dive bombed me. But the dive bombing happens because of DRS. I don't know how many times one has to say that. If we didn't have DRS, probably Max would have got past Lewis in a relatively straightforward manoeuvre where he gets a toe and just comes down the inside and does a normal pass. But because of this dive bombing thing and because of DRS, it was a mess. And I think it's very difficult for the stewards when they're looking at evidence afterwards to take into account the true difference in speed differential between the two and what it looks like. You cannot get a picture of speed differential just from the onboard camera. No way. You need to be able to see all the dynamics going on peripherally. And I think, yeah, of course Lewis could have done more to avoid the collision, but he's a racing driver and he did brilliantly under defence, so why wouldn't he try to close the door as much as he could? So I blame DRS for that. I think DRS should get a 10-place grid penalty. There you go. Now here's another good one. Sheriff of Saint Devote. Thank you very much, Sheriff of Saint Devote, for mentioning this. What do you think of Binotto at Audi? I think it's not a good sign for Audi to have lost Seidel. Well, I have to disagree there, because I think those two guys have been at one another's throats. It was pretty clear for the last couple of months. They both wanted to get one another fired, and they both got fired. So I think that's a good thing. Somebody out there is making a tough decision. And as I said, when they announced a performance engineer not so long ago, for a team that doesn't even have a car or an engine at all running, it's a bit early to be hiring a performance engineer, isn't it? And so I like the idea of Mattia Binotto going to Audi. And I may be the only person saying this, but I like it because they need to get a car built, and they need to get it built on time. And I think that's one thing Mattia Binotto, being an engine engineer, will ensure happens. And that's exactly the sort of guy Audi need right now. Further down the road, yep, I think they need a good racy team principal who can get on with it and bring some life to Sauber and all those things. And I think Andreas Siedel's probably quite good in that area, but I don't think he's the only guy on the block. I think there's probably, 10, 15 people that could do that. The more difficult role is the one they've got Mattia doing, which is CEO, obviously, but his job is the difficult thing. Get that car built. Get that car built by a company which is used to racing and endurance racing, much longer timelines, rallying, all that other stuff. Formula One is completely different. And he has a Formula One mindset because of his years at Ferrari. And he's an engineer. And I think that's a really good move by Audi to have got him. I'm absolutely shocked, actually, at how good a move I think that is. And how I think he'll make a big difference there. So I'm very excited about that. And I don't think Andreas Seidel, for all his talents in some areas, I don't think he was the right guy to make sure that car was going to be built on time. Because Audi, being based in Germany, are going to be subjected to all the German union laws, all the difficulties of trying to build a Grand Prix car against the clock in a very, can I say bureaucratic? Probably not. Probably I can't. In a very legislated environment. Unlike the sort of Silicon Valley UK area where things just get done, and if they don't get done, they get done at 3 a.m. before the car's about to run. And I think Binotto for sure will have that attitude. He's a Ferrari guy that knows how to get things done and built. And it's not to say it's going to be a pace setter from day one, but it means that Audi are going to be looking pretty good in terms of having a car being where they need to be with crash testing and everything else and the power unit and all that stuff. And they'll get some good people. And I'll tell you something else here. I may well be totally wide of the mark, but I think Binotto and Carlos Sainz got on fairly well when they were at Ferrari. And I wouldn't be surprised if Carlos was quite impressed by that move. May not go there. I think the problem for Carlos, still thinking as I speak, is not so much what is my best option out there out of a fairly motley bunch. It's what is the option that's going to do my career the most damage if I go for it? Is it going to be Williams? Is it going to be Alpine? Is it going to be 1 year at Mercedes against George? Is it going to be 1 year at Red Bull against Max? Is it going to be Audi? It's a very difficult situation, and I keep saying it. I take my hat off to Carlos for the way he's carrying himself and the performances he's putting in what is about the most difficult situation in which any racing driver can find himself. Any racing driver worth his salt, capable of winning Grand Prix in the way that Carlos Sainz is. And that's I don't know, it'd be nice to see him at Audi, wouldn't it? He and Nico Hulkenberg, not a bad team. Anna Palma Valsaraj. Are Mercedes really back? No, I don't think so. They got blown away by the customer team, didn't they? They're not going to be back until they're comprehensively 1 or 2 tenths quicker than their customer teams, including McLaren. 3 races out of 5. And I can't see that happening this year. Saying Mercedes are still scratching, and they're not where they should be, given their heritage, given their experience, their knowledge, and all the other things, the budget and everything else. And let's not forget they have a huge budget for the power unit side of their business. So no, they're not really back, and they still keep tripping over things. We had that whole FTX thing with the sponsorship, which wasn't a good look. Mercedes, the blue chip Formula One team, aligning itself with what turns out to be obviously a really, really corrupt company, that FTX thing. And then, okay, we put all that to one side. These things happen. And then, of course, the whole CrowdStrike thing was quite embarrassing, wasn't it? And not Mercedes' fault at all. And it's not unusual for these huge cyber companies, I guess, to have glitches in their software. But again, you know, it's sort of the whole reason to be with the Formula One team is that that's a megaphone for your product, and there's Mercedes doing this thing with CrowdStrike, and all of a sudden, whoa, we better not talk about them too much for a while. Carl Gevers, good evening, ladies and gents. Settling in for another masterclass. Oh, well, that's very kind. Thank you very much. I wish that was the case in terms of my tennis or my golf, but anyway, there you go. Eddie Moretti, great to see Peter supporting Ukraine. Yeah, very easy, I think, for us all to say, oh, well, you know, been there, done that. Ukraine's over, now let's move on to the next one. But I feel very strongly about it. I've actually got some very good Ukrainian friends, and I've got also very good UK friends who used to spend quite a lot of time in Ukraine doing a lot of charity work. So I feel very strongly about that whole situation. And hopefully now, with certain without getting any way political, hopefully with certain changes going on in the States at the moment, there might be more, you know, continued sustained support for Ukraine in the future. Sheriff of Sandervoort again, a Tsunoda Verstappen lineup at Red Bull and Hadjar Lawson at VCARB would be the best thing for Red Bull. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I've got this, there's a gentleman that emails me quite a lot who, he's never on the show. Before I answer that question, I'll just read you his latest email if I can find it. He's pretty, there he goes, pretty wise. He says, Peter, you can relate to being an F1 team owner. Well, not really, but I kind of try to sometimes, even though your exposure was brief. What do you think is on the minds of Red Bull ownership, both the Austrian contingent and the Thai contingent, with developments over the past 6 months or so, including Horner's dalliance with a female staff member, the feud with Joss, Adrian Newey's impending departure, loss of Red Bull's dominance, Max throwing hissy fits, Perez's inability to keep his car on track, let alone score points. What will they be thinking? The team must be thinking the wheels have come off. Then there's the Ford probably wondering what they're getting into. Great soap opera. This is from John Mitulich. Thank you for that, John. And this question is kind of, yeah, they need a big shake-up. It's interesting, isn't it? I suspect Red Bull are thinking, yeah, actually, you know, we've still got Max Verstappen and we've still got a very good team and things are going to be okay. And yes, they're not the same. The biggest difference, obviously, is the departure of Adrian Newey. We knew the car was never going to be totally dominant right to the end of the 25 Formula One season, the end of these regulations. We knew that the others would catch up. It's better for the Formula One now. There's more racing. I'm sure that's what they're thinking. In terms of the driver lineup, you know, I keep saying it's very easy to judge Sergio Perez on the number of crashes he's having. The Mexican press is saying, the new James Bond, 007, 0 points, 0 this with 7 shunts. Poor old Sergio. But he obviously still plays a role in the team. He's got a lot of sponsorship. He's got Carlos Slim almost exclusively of all the Mexican drivers. All the marketing and all the business side of that is all around Perez. And so it's a huge thing for them now in Mexico. And there's a lot of money tied to that Perez has initiated and brings to Red Bull. And that's part of the reason he's re-signed, because he does actually trigger a lot of money going to the team. We're talking, I don't know, I must be 30 million, I would think, maybe 40. And he's not a bad driver. He's quick, but he has his moments and doesn't listen, probably. Sort of Charles Leclerc on steroids, doesn't listen anymore. If I rang him up and said, Sergio, here's Rob Wilson's phone number, just do a few days, do yourself a favour, book 5 days in the August break. He'd just go click like that, you know, it wouldn't, well, he'd be polite, but he wouldn't do it. He's got nothing to learn. It's not me. It must be the car. Must be the environment. Must be the team. Must be this. Not working hard enough. Must go to the gym more. It won't be, I don't actually put the power down as well as I should. Well, that's not the case. He does put the power down as well as he should. It won't be the way he hits the brake pedal or comes out of the brake pedal or the way he loads the car up going into a corner, a medium speed corner. It won't be that, because he knows how to do it. And that's the problem. So anyway, you're saying Yuki Tsunoda, Max Verstappen. Yeah, not bad. I'd go for that, if that's what Red Bull did. It'd be a bit of a funny one, because it would be, are they going to keep Tsunoda after Honda moved to Aston Martin and they're running with Ford? Bearing in mind that's a sort of delta of 40 million that they're losing from Perez, and they wouldn't then be getting from Tsunoda. So would they put him in on that basis? I don't know. I think, on the plus side from the Red Bull management ownership point of view, Red Bull as a team are generating more money than they used to. They're not relying so much on Red Bull to sign every check. Hadjar Lawson. Yeah, it's not a bad combination. He seems very good, Isaac Hadjar, doesn't he? Looks very good. Every time he's out, it's extraordinary, isn't it, in F2? He always seems, tyres always seem to be in great shape compared with everybody else. It must be magically good with tyres. Incredible. He is good, there's no doubt. Liam Lawson, yeah, he's a good reflexy, George Russell-y type driver, so that would be a good combination as well. Yeah, okay, well, that Sheriff of Sandovote, I'm sure everybody at Red Bull has taken note, and they're thinking that through as we speak. No mention of poor old Daniel Ricciardo there. M.A. Khan, super chat, thank you very much, M.A. Khan, one of our regulars and one of our great supporters over the years. Hi, how would you compare two recent champions in Hill and Button? Jenson, despite losing to teammates, gets far more credit than Damon. Who was better? Oh, you love to put me on the spot, don't you? Whatever I say here, I'm going to get trashed by the other guy when I bump into him next. I would say Damon. I think Damon had just all-round ability. I think Damon could drive more with the rear of the car than Jenson Button. You could throw a crosswind at Damon. You could throw mid-corner oil or moisture on the track at Damon, and he would catch it, and he would probably enjoy the moment and talk about it when he got out of the car. And Damon, I think Damon is quite underrated. I mean, he was brilliant in the wet, particularly Suzuka, obviously, and I think he was never. There was a moment, I think, when he got a little bit outside himself when he left Williams, actually, and went to Jordan. He should never have done that. He should have stayed at Williams, stayed quiet, and won at least another world championship at Williams. And then there'll be no more talk about who's the greater driver. But he didn't, because the money thing got into it, and his manager, I even listened to his manager, always fatal to do that, isn't it? So that was the bad side to Damon. I think as a racing driver, I think he was good. I think he was really good. He was tough. He was a sort of James Hunt type English sportsman athlete that just gets on with it, and he was fearless. He was fearless. I think he was good. He was really good. I think Jenson was more of an artist, if you like. I think if Damon painted in oil colours and it was Jenson was watercolours and quite detailed stuff, and in detail he was really good as well. I mean, of course he was good in the wet, he's good in the semi-wet. A lot of that was just his great ability, the sort of Perez-like ability to put the power down at exactly the right rate, and he was really good on never braking when he had throttle. He always had a clean throttle or clean brake. His overlap was non-existent unless he wanted it, and I don't think he used overlap very much. He was just, his coordination footwork was superb. And give him a car with a good back end, he could do anything with it, really. But give him a weak back end or dodgy conditions, as he usually got at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, and he was, struggling. And he always did struggle at Silverstone, interestingly enough. And the great thing about the Brawn in 09 was it had a very solid back end on it. And that was Jenson's thing. There was that very odd year he had at Benetton. Was it Benetton or Renault? I can't remember. Against Fisichella. And I think he got out-qualified 13-3. Now, some of that might have been not being very comfortable in the cockpit of the car, but it was significant, I think, in terms of evaluating Jenson. But Jenson, absolute class act in terms of when the car was right, is a difficult guy for Lewis Hamilton to beat, and that's how good he was. But overall, I would say D Hill. Sorry, Jenson. I know what's going to happen next. I know. Praise God. Well, okay. McLaren gave up the pilot's title. Well, yeah, 7 points they took away from Lando. I always remember, as if it was yesterday, Michael saying in an interview I did with him once, I said, everybody wanted to ask him about why he always had these team orders and wasn't he out of order himself in having them, and poor old Rubens and poor old Felipe and poor old Eddie. And he said, look, I could lose the Drivers' Championship by 1 point. And if I get beaten by my teammate for whatever reason, and I've got 3 points that have gone, there you go. That's why I want to win every race, or be in the front leader of the 2 Ferrari drivers every race. And 7 points that Lando lost or gave away in that Hungarian Grand Prix. As I said at the start of the show, I'm sure it won't be that close. But imagine if Max ends up winning the championship by 5 points from Lando Norris. What would McLaren people be thinking then? What would Lando be thinking then? Another super chat. Thank you very much, Baptanian. I'm a long-time racing fan, but newish Formula One from the States. And I just wanted to say that I have greatly appreciated your extensive knowledge and straightforward, no-nonsense delivery. That's very kind, Babtanian. These shows are live. And when I start reading that, a question like that, I never know where it's going to go. It could go, and I think you are the biggest prat that ever walked this earth. And somebody's going to do that soon, I know. And that's what live is all about. You just have to accept it. Anyway, Ali Kafsta. There's another one. Sorry, I'm not doing a very good job pronouncing your name there, Alikafsta. Okay, super chat anyway. Thank you very much. Peter, what is your take on McLaren's strange surrender for Norris winning the Drivers' Championship? Would just trail 69 points after Max and half the season left with Red Bull in negative spiral. Why spoil 7 points? Well, yeah, exactly what we've been saying. Thank you for echoing what I've just been saying. It's almost beyond belief. And I, as I keep saying, when Max woke up Monday morning, he might have thought, I should have done a better job in that Spa 24-hour iRace. Or what was Helmut Marko on about? What was my engineer on about? That's all Lewis's fault, or whatever he was thinking. And then he would have thought, but hang on, Piastri won that race. You got to be joking. So Lando didn't get the 7 points for the win. Wow, mega, what a result. That's probably what he would have been thinking. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And as I say, McLaren obviously, and I don't think they're the first team to do this. So to be fair to McLaren, I don't think they're the first team in Formula One on a Sunday morning in the position they're in when they've got 2 cars on the front row or near the front row. I don't think they'd be the first team to say, well, what happens if we, contrary to what we really want to do, we're forced into going into the pit stop earlier, say 2 laps earlier than we want, because the guy we want to cover has gone in a bit earlier. And what we'll do then, it's always safer to bring the trail driver in first because it's just safer and it's a better logical thing to do. So if we do that, and the trail driver then happens to get back into the lead, or into the lead as a result of that, all we're trying to do is just cover the P3, then we will give the lead back to the lead driver. Now, I've said, and I said this a lot at the start of the show, and I hope I made my point clear. I think using undercuts, which involve in and out laps and pit stops, as something around which you base a team order instruction is playing with fire, because there are so many variables involved. It's not the same as 2 cars running on track together 5 seconds apart and saying to one, let the other guy past, because that's the team order that we agreed at the start of the race, or we agreed that whoever was leading at lap 25 would be in front, or it's in your contract. Or it's not the same, and it's not the same as well as 2 drivers running nose to tail for 5th place, one of them on tyres that are 4 laps old, one of them on tyres that are 10 lap old, the guy on the older tyres is in front, and the team deciding that it's logical for the guy on the newer tyres to go past to see if he can do something about the guy who's running P4. And then if he can't, to give the position back. When you start doing it with something as variable as an undercut, that's when I think it's a stretch too far to start playing around with team orders at that point. But I think other teams do that. And this isn't the first or the last time we'll see it. And I think it's a function of the teams all having strategy engineers now who do nothing but strategy. And the word undercut is just a single word that appears alongside words like old tyres, new tyres, pit stop on lap 43, whatever it is. It's just a word, but it's a word that has a massive amount of weight attached to it that you're actually taking into an argument that involves human beings in terms of their race wins and the career of a driver and winning a race or not winning a race. And so I think it's a function of the principle of the undercut, being taken almost for granted as something that, oh yeah, it'll get this result, that result. Look what happened in Hungary with Red Bull. I mean, they didn't counter Lewis Hamilton coming in early. Oh, we got to cover Lewis Hamilton. He's coming early. None of that. They kept Max out. Okay, arguably they kept him out too long. That was Max's gripe. But they didn't just immediately respond to Lewis. But there's a lot of that going on. Oh, we undercut. We got to cover him. Got to cover the undercut. Sometimes the overcut works. That's the other problem. What do they do then? So if I'd been, and I think you always have to put yourself in the firing line here, and I try to, if I'm ever critical, I hope to be constructively critical on the basis that what would I have done in that situation? And if I'd been privileged enough to have been in that McLaren pre-race briefing, and I've got to say here, I'm only assuming that's what it was. The way it came over on the radio, it might have been just if whoever's leading at lap 22 should win the race. I don't know. But I'm assuming it was to do with that undercut. If I'd been involved in that discussion, I would have said, nah, don't start bringing undercuts into it. If you're bringing undercuts into it, that's coming under the heading of the best race strategy for the team in order to finish 1-2. Whatever happens, happens. And if so-and-so is lying P2, and if he's the one that gets the undercut, and then he gets the benefit, so the cookie crumbles. We can't start playing around with team orders after that. We can on other things, but not with undercuts. Don't play with undercuts, because it puts too much pressure on drivers on in-laps and out-laps, and indeed on the boys in the pit stops. That's what I would have said. So obviously they would have said, well, that's a load of old nonsense, Windsor, go away. Because why? Because obviously they did decide to use the undercut. Wayne Roan. How long would it take Newey if he moves to Aston Martin to make that car competitive? Well, not very long, I don't think. I think a lot of people love to say the days of instant or fast success are over. I don't think they are. I still think Adrian Newey is significantly better than many of the engineers out there. I think there are some engineers who probably are on a par given the team they have and the situation, their team of people they have around them and the situations they're in. But I think in terms of just coming in cold, looking at a car and looking at the underside of the car, the floor of a car, I think Adrian still has the best eye in Formula One. And as trite as this sounds, I think Adrian would be able to look at the floor of the Aston Martin. Excuse me 1 second. We would be able to look at the floor of the Aston Martin and say, well, what's that straight doing there? Why has that curve got that radius like that? No. So it would be as long as, I'm not saying he would get it right to the front straight away, but I think Adrian would be able, as long as it takes to make a buck and to do the carbon mold that you need and then to make the parts, probably some of it 3D printing anyway, that's how long it would take to get the Aston Martin to be a better car. And what are we thinking now? I don't really know, because I don't think anybody's privy to Adrian Newey's personal life and contract. Are we thinking that if he goes to Aston, he'll be allowed to work at the beginning of 2025 and will therefore have a big influence on the 25 car, let alone the 26 design? Or are we thinking he wouldn't start until 2/3 of the way or halfway through 25 working solely on the 26 car? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody does really at this stage. But sad to say, I think he might go there. Oops, shouldn't be saying that. Naveen Koshi. Does Ferrari have a chance this circuit? I think you mean at the Belgian Grand Prix. Well, I think on the basis that they appear not to have much chance, because their big issue at the moment, as we saw with Charles Leclerc's massive spin in crash in the on Friday in Hungary, they're not very good on medium high-speed corners. And let's think, at Spa, Eau Rouge they'll be all right because it's basically flat. And in the wet, I think the drivers are good enough to be okay. The car won't be the most drivable, predictable car in the wet through there, but I think they'll be right up there, Carlos and Charles. So I think top chicane, they won't be very good. Next right-hander down the hill, that very annoying understeering right-hander, I don't think they'll be very good there. The left-hander, they won't be good there. So that's 2.5 corners. Then there's Pouin, they'll be hopeless. That's 3.5 corners. Next bit, Stavelot chicane, all that will be okay. Flat all the way up to Blanchimont. So it's about 3.5 corners. They'll be all right. La Source, they'll be okay. The bus stop chicane, they'll be okay. It's not the bus stop chicane anymore. It's just a chicane, isn't it? They'll be okay there. And so it's about those corners in the midsection. So what they'll do probably is run a lot of downforce, try to have the ride height as low as they can get it. Sorry, they won't run a lot of downforce. They'll try and run as low as they can in sector 2 to get sector 2 half reasonable and without bouncing. And then they'll just have to live with what they're doing elsewhere. So Ferdo Swaggins says, evening, Mr. Windsor. Would you replace Perez after the summer break? And if so, who with? Well, I'm not privy to how much pressure Red Bull team in Milton Keynes is under from Red Bull ownership to start pulling their weight financially. In other words, how important is the money that Sergio Perez brings to the team? So I've said that, and I'm just repeating myself, but I think it's an appropriate point to make, that money that Perez does bring is important. The sponsorship that has grown up around him in Mexico is important, and it would all disappear if he left. So what would I do? I wouldn't replace Perez, no. I'd send him to Rob Wilson for 2 weeks in August, every day. And I'd be there watching, make sure he doesn't leave early. And I would bet that he'd find a tenth, if not 2/10 of a second on any given lap, most average circuits, which would magnify into, a massive advantage over a race distance. I would bet he would be more able to drive under pressure, and he would be better in the wet as a result of doing those days with Rob Wilson. That's what I would do. Lucas. Hi, Peter. What are your thoughts on Lewis getting to 200 podiums? I know you're not really into stats because of how many races there are, but how impressive a stat is it? Yeah, it's really impressive, isn't it? 200 podiums. I mean, it just makes you think how long he's been racing, which is what? Since 2007. So it's not surprising. It's an incredible achievement. It's not surprising in the sense of how good he is, having driven for McLaren and Mercedes exclusively, and how many races there are, and how many races actually have podiums. I've got to say that because, of course, there were some races in the old days that didn't have podiums. So you often didn't talk about, I was on the podium at Monaco, because there was no podium. You just went up, it was just the winner, and that was it. 64 Austrian Grand Prix, similar thing, just Lorenzo. But I'm obviously being a bit trite there, aren't I? But I know what you mean by podium finishes, top threes. No, it's brilliant. Of course, I'm a Lewis Hamilton fan, and it annoys me to have to admit that because it's such an obvious thing. Why wouldn't anybody who doesn't rate Lewis as one of the great Grand Prix drivers of all time hasn't been watching Formula One? He's that good. He's really, really good. Max is too. And I try not to be polarized. I just accept their talent for what it is, which is a God-given, amazing talent that I love watching every day. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. If Lewis Hamilton was testing at Valencia, just up the road from where I live, next week, in whatever car, I'd go and watch him drive around on his own all day, as I would if it was Max. I think I would with Lando and Oscar. I think I would with the two Ferrari drivers as well. Maybe with somebody like Bottas, I might go and watch him as well. But there are a lot of guys I wouldn't cross the road to watch, that's for sure. But absolutely for sure, Lewis Hamilton is one of them. It's great. And you can measure Lewis's success in any number of ways. I still think the best way is the number of wins, really, isn't it? I know that takes into account the different form of motor racing we have today, but 7 world championships, should have been 8, pretty serious. So this is, just going to make sure this has come up correctly. Yeah, it has. Question. This is from Andrew Fish, another super chat. Thank you, Andrew. Is there any strategy for a team leading 1-2 to stay in DRS, swapping places, saving tyres, and so extending a lead over the pack? Yeah, absolutely there is. And actually what springs to mind there is I was trying to think when it was now. It was two years ago, maybe it was. I think it was the last Russian Grand Prix anyway. It was Russia, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, And because it was such a long run down to the first corner, it was very clear that it was easy to get past. And they decided to, and Charles, I think it was Charles decided to let Carlos pass. No, it wasn't. What am I talking about? It was Sebastian Vettel. It was Sebastian Vettel, there you go, and Charles. And they decided that Charles would pass Vettel and that Vettel would then get into the DRS and repass him. And so, yeah, that does happen. And that one ended in tears, I think, at the first corner, didn't it, from memory, from Vettel now? But I remember that coming up, that it was so obvious that there was going to be a drama going, and they wanted to prevent whoever it was, Max or someone, from getting them into the, on that long straight in Russia. So yeah, of course that does happen a lot, and I think that happens in anywhere where you got these long DRS straights. Obviously, Jeddah's another circuit, isn't it, for that? And saving tires, extending lead over the pack. Yeah, we have that. You hear that on the radio quite a lot. Am I going to get help from him? Do that? And we had it relatively recently. And where was it? We had that. Might have been Miami, actually. I think I remember a team talking about that, how to look after the tires and using DRS and 1-2 like that. So yeah, I suppose from that sense, DRS is quite a good thing because it's part of the tactics and it's quite interesting. But that's not what it was designed for, of course. And it's kind of, DRS has found a way of justifying its existence, but it's quite complicated because it's not directly obvious to the television viewer what's going on. But it is the only plus side I can think of, DRS. It's quite an interesting thing. It's a bit like the old slipstreaming days, really, isn't it? It's not only tyres, it's saving fuel as well. Thank you for that. Thomas at Mineshaft Gamer. Yes, not sure how Max going faster makes their overtake harder. Yeah, I think you agree with me on that one. I think so. Thank you. Again, all those overtakes, and Austria is a good example. The Lando Max thing. It's all muddied by DRS and speed differential. And Scroopy Noopers has actually absolutely captured exactly what I just said, which is that it is from the devil. Thank you. I think you're right. It's wrong. It's a completely ludicrous thing for a childlike appreciation of Formula One. And anybody who's got a brain doesn't need DRS in order to enhance their enjoyment of Formula One. As I said, after Hungary, the beauty of that drive from Lewis was his defence, not his attack. Obviously, he wasn't in a position to attack. And Trail Break 3 makes the point that I made, that he has Mattia Binotto has a relationship with Carlos Sainz. He does. So just to reiterate, I always rated Mattia Binotto. I think he's got a very calm demeanour. He's an engineer, and I'm always super impressed by engineers anyway. Andy Cowell, he's at Aston Martin, isn't he? And he's an engineer. That's good. I'd say that's very good for Aston Martin. Very good, man. I mean, if Audi didn't get Andy Cowell, they probably got maybe the next best guy, because Mattia does have experience at running a team and handling people, and he's bright enough to have learned from any mistakes he might have made at Ferrari. I think it's a good move. Thomas at Roshan KR. Without DRS, Max is further back from Lewis, so has to dive bomb from further back. Well, would he be further back? That's the question. I'm not sure you're right there, because there was part of the problem with Hungary, DRS, and this is usually the case with DRS, it's one of my criticisms, is that in order to activate DRS, you had to be within half a second going into the last corner. And that was for both DRS activations. And I don't think, if there was DRS, I don't think Max would have been within half a second of Lewis at the last corner. I think he would have driven the lap differently. And I think he would have maybe he maybe would have adjusted his driving, and he maybe would have been relatively slow in, very fast out. And he had the top speed. He had the top speed to be able to get a toe. And if you get a top speed advantage over Lewis, 2 to 3 kilometers an hour. And if you get the toe, then you can do a beautifully judged pass. When you do a DRS thing, it's vroom like that with the speed differential, and it's a really complex thing. And you're doing it from quite far back because you've had to do this be within half a second, which is an uncomfortable place to be just before that last corner. So, yeah, praise God comes back and says, ban DRS. So there you go. We did something. That's the name of this questioner. Peter, do you think we've seen a difference in Lewis since his Silverstone win? I thought he defended brilliantly from a fast, snappy Max in Hungary. How important was that win for him? I don't think we have. I think we've seen a good Lewis since Abu Dhabi 21. He's just been in a pretty bad car. Maybe a bit more confidence. I think ever since he signed for Ferrari, Lewis has been pretty relaxed and has been driving pretty well. And he's got quite a lot from the car, and he's driven some very good races, not necessarily in lights in terms of winning or maybe even P2, but I think he's been around long enough, and he's been around the block enough times not suddenly to be a different driver just because he's won the British Grand Prix. He's been there doing it all the time. It's just circumstances, and they're very difficult. They're still pretty much on a knife edge at Mercedes. They don't have a big sweet spot. It's bigger than it was, but it's still edgy compared with what McLaren have. I'm just going back to a super chat. Oh yeah, this is Bernie's bottle of Aramis. Somebody's been listening to this channel. Yeah, Bernie, for those who don't know, there were two aromas synonymous with Bernie Ecclestone in his heyday. One was Ajax, which he used to carry around in copious amounts, sprinkling over the bathrooms and anywhere else in the factory, because he couldn't bear the smell of anything other than pure Ajax. And the other was, I'm talking about cleanser, obviously, and the other was Aramis. He was just like, wow. You could smell Bernie from one end of the pit lane to the other in those early days. Talking about the 70s now, when it was sort of, you had the shirt with the sort of flower power pattern in the early Brabham days, 72, 73. Yeah, I'd say for about 5 years he was mega Aramis man. Max says that Fernando's, anyway, this is Bernie's bottle of Aramis. Max says that Fernando's top 5 of all time. Thoughts? This is a super chat. Yeah, I think it's a big stretch to say top 5 of all time. And if you ask Max to talk about all the drivers from all time and how they stack up against Fernando and how he justifies that, he'd probably say, oh, well, Nuvolari is probably a name. I'd be surprised if he's got much knowledge. I'm not in decrying him. I'm just saying he's a standard Formula One driver. So why would Max's knowledge of Formula One embrace all time? I don't think it does. I think it's just a phrase that people drop and it's come out of his mouth. Oh, he's one of the greatest of all time. One of the top 5 all time. No, I don't think he's one of the top 5 of all time. And whoever was talking to Max, interviewing Max, did they say, really? I mean, what do you think about Fernando's initial steering input? And he'd say, what do you mean? And say, well, he's always, compared with you, he's always jolting the car because he just loves to get that feel. And that's great, providing the car can take it. And then quite often can't. And he becomes, not quite as good as he normally is. Really? Really? I haven't seen that. He'll say, well, it's true. If you ever go out in the circuit to watch from a grandstand, you'll see it. Oh, really? Okay. And then he might revise it. But I think because he just looks at results and he reads and listens a lot. Sorry, he doesn't read and listen. He probably listens to a lot of people when it comes to, probably listens to Fernando. Fernando, I would imagine they're probably quite good mates because they're similar sorts of people, aren't they, in a way? And I think, and they're karting and everything. And I imagine Fernando's told Max a lot about how he got screwed at McLaren and would have won at McLaren if he hadn't got screwed. And same at Ferrari, and that was one championship and a couple of championships win at Ferrari. And Max probably thinks, well, yeah, it's probably the case. He's very good. Whenever he's in a car, you can never underestimate Fernando when it's semi-wet or he's in a bad car. You can always assume he's going to get it round together. But I actually don't buy that. I think Fernando is supremely good. And I would say of his era, he would definitely be top 6. But I wouldn't put him top 5 of all time. I just wouldn't do it. I think partly because it's so difficult to compare the two. I mean, if I said to Max Verstappen, so tell me why you think Max Verstappen is better. What, Max? Sorry, I said to Max, why you think Fernando Alonso is a better driver than Bernd Rosemeyer? What would he say? He said, "Oh well, I don't know, Rosemeyer." And so it's a pointless thing saying of all time. He wouldn't even. So I mean, let's just think about it. If you want to talk about all time, the absolute certainties that you've got to have there would be what, Nuvolari, Caracciola, Varzi probably, Ascari, Fangio, Moss, Clark, and then I'm up to 7 already. So how can he say Fernando best 5 of all time? I'm not decrying Fernando, but I think that's just a ludicrous comment, really. Robert Heyman, no more DRS. Good. And we need to start a campaign, don't we? Wonder if I should do a survey and say, should we keep DRS, yes or no? Be great. But the last time I did that, which was, do we have sprint races? And we got something like 68% said no, get rid of them. The FIA did nothing, so F1 did nothing. So I've kind of given up. Stephen, slipstreaming can create enough of speed differential to make the point moot. Yeah, well, he's right. That's exactly my point. I'm not saying we should ban slipstreaming. And don't forget, these cars, supposedly it's easier to overtake anyway. We don't need all that DRS. Oh, turn up the mic, please. Well, that's a shame. Michael Bolton says, turn up the mic. I've got the mic setting absolutely normal, and I've actually got it closer to my mouth than I normally have. So I'm not going to turn it up any higher, because then you start getting all that popping and everything, but hopefully that's a bit better. I'm sorry if it hasn't been great for you. Hopefully from here on in. And what is it now? I've only got 10 minutes to go anyway. Have I? What is it? 8:30, 7:30, 8:30? No, it's 10 to 9, so we've got another 40 minutes. Michael Fearman. Lando, I can't read the other half of this. Lando thrives for his social lifestyle. Not a chance that's happening. Oh, this is my suggestion, that he turns it all off. Well, he only does because he's been doing it all this time, and somewhere along the line he's really enjoyed it, and even though he's probably getting a bit bored with it now, I would imagine. That was just me whispering it. Don't need to turn up the mic. And also people saying it's a good thing to do. But is it? I mean, it's a good thing to do in terms of business for other people and money that other people are going to make. I'm talking about Lando Norris becoming a hard, savage racing driver who can win a world championship. And I think social media does not help. I think he should go into Jimmy Connors mode, and he really should just go into this isolated bubble. And it's going to be interesting, I think. You talk about, did Lewis's win have any impact on the way he drove in Hungary? And I sort of said, no, I don't think it did, because he's always been good, and he's very good even in a bad car, Lewis, or a bad situation. But it'll be interesting to see the mindset now of Lewis and Oscar as they go into the Belgian Grand Prix. Because Lando's, I think he's capable of going two ways. He's always a bit down on himself and a bit down on his prospects, which I kind of like, actually. I kind of like it. It's kind of classic Lando. Well, it wasn't that good. I kind of like that, because it comes out of the heading almost of being a bit self-critical. And if he does feel now, 3 days after Hungary, with enough people, and maybe even, people like me saying, wow, he just threw away 7 points. Those don't come easy. Look how long he had to go to win his first Grand Prix, and he's just thrown a win away. If he dwells on that, he might think, I'm really, I'm not going to let that happen again. I've done my thing now. I've done my thing with Oscar. I'm just going to go for it now. He may think like that, which I think would be a good thing. Equally, Oscar may think, I've won a Grand Prix now. I'm not the rookie anymore. I'm not the young guy in the team. And you know what? Max has a terrible second half. I've got half a chance of being world champion. He could think that. He's a racer. Why wouldn't he? So it'd be interesting to see. I mean, that's why I say, when you start bringing something as big, as clumsy as an undercut into the mix of team orders and telling one driver to lose and one driver to win, when you start doing that to the background of something as complex as an undercut, the repercussions and the ripples will continue for who knows how long. And they may not be obvious now, but they might be obvious in a month or 2 months or 3 months. They might be obvious at Spa. We'll see. Thomas, we have DRS and slipstreaming. Not sure how DRS makes overtaking harder. What makes overtaking harder, just to reiterate the point, because you're artificially carrying too much speed into a zone that you wouldn't want to be carrying that speed into. if there was no DRS, you wouldn't be positioning the car where you are, either before the activation zone or when you're trying to do the pass. DRS forces the issue and takes away the ability to place the car perfectly before the detection zone and after it. That's my point. It's an artificial thing that clumsily gives more ticks to the boxes of overtaking without in any way taking into account the mess it can cause with massive speed differential. Brian Bob has no doubt. Lewis turned into him. Okay. Darth Lord Raven. Yes, let's bring back old-fashioned slipstreaming like it was. Scroopy Noopers says Peter's gaslighting us. He knows Audi will be super terrible. Really? You're probably being well, he's talking amongst themselves there, kind of, but you probably think I'm gaslighting. I'm not, actually. I actually have quite a lot of respect for Audi. Just I had quite a lot of respect for Toyota. Everybody always trashed Toyota's Formula One thing, but I think, given how difficult the F1 world made life for Toyota politically, I think Toyota actually did very well. And I don't see Audi doing any worse than Toyota. I think they'll probably do better than Toyota. And I think now that Mattia's there, I think they'll go quite well. Oh, sorry, yeah, Sounds of Silence. He went to Arrows, didn't he? That's right. There's Damon Hill. I completely forgotten that Arrows. So he nearly won the Hungarian Grand Prix, didn't he? Yeah, he went to Arrows from Williams, and then he went to Jordan with the whole Benson and Hedges thing. Yeah, apologies for that. Why had I forgotten that? Because it was such a ridiculous thing. I'm just kind of, well, you know, forget about that year for Damon Hill. Yeah, went to Arrows. What was he thinking? What he was thinking was that I can beat Michael Schumacher, and he's on 20 million, and I'm on 3.5, and I want at least 15, and Frank's offering me 5 to stay. So I'm going. And presumably Arrows paid him 7 or something. I don't know where they got the money, but I guess that's what's happened. Another super chat. Shanawaz. No, it's not a super chat. It's just a donation. Thank you very much, Shanawaz. That's very kind. Scroopy's Noopers says Tsunoda will give Max a run for his money. Really? Not sure you're right there. In what sense? On iRacing, you think? I don't know if that's come up anyway. Probably hasn't. But anyway, he said Tsunoda will give Max a run for his money. No, I don't think so. Okay. Russian KR at JSMR. Are you using Internet Explorer? The pecking order has changed since last year. Ha ha ha. Oh, really? Quite sure what you mean by that. Which pecking order? Being a bit stupid here. Anapama Valsarajas. Hi, Peter. What do you think about the rumour that the FIA forced Red Bull to remove some illegal parts from the car that might be the reason they're not dominant anymore? Yeah, I think it's probably true-ish, but no more true-ish than what any Formula One team worth its salt does throughout the year, which is always think of things that may be slightly on the edge and either go ahead and run it and get the FIA's opinion, Joe Bauer's opinion at Parc Ferme, or ring up in advance to see what the FIA think of it. This happens all the time. The fact that it's Red Bull and they were the champions and now they're not going quite well, I think that's why this thing's come out as a big story. But I think that's normal. If they weren't doing that and trying things that are on the edge and getting the FIA either to get them to remove it, I don't think they'd be doing their job. So I don't think it's a big deal, and it happens all the time. And I think you'll find it will affect other teams as well, that sort of thing. And it won't be the last time Red Bull will be playing with fire, if that's the right word. Cool CMSC. Damon should have stayed at Williams, and he is more aggressive and tough. Good, glad you agree with me. Thank you. Trailbreaker says it's pizza time. Well, I wish you enjoy your pizza. Now, the thing about pizza is a lot of people, when they talk about the perfect pizza, I've been listening to quite a lot of radio podcast things, not radio, but podcasts recently, always come up, what's the best pizza? Oh, no, I'll tell you where it was. It was before the British Open. The TV company there did a thing, with all maybe it's all the Italian golfers. What is the best pizza? And they all trashed Pizza Fiorentina, the one with pineapple and spinach. I think that is the best pizza. But I know you're all going to say, well, that's not pizza. But that was I think it is. It's got to be well cooked, but I think that is the best pizza you can have. I love pineapple with pizza and ham. Definitely. But I'm not sure pizza's the greatest thing in the world for you these days. I don't know why. It seems to be not great for your metabolism the next morning. Maybe it's something to be said for just eating God's food as it's provided by God and drinking water. Maybe that's the way we should all go. Anyway, okay, right. What are we doing here? Josh mentioned 3 underrated drivers: Ocon, Albon, Peter Windsor chat. I don't know if that's a question to me or you're chatting amongst yourselves, but is Ocon underrated? I think underrated depends on what you think plaudits have been handed out towards those drivers. I think Albon's kind of perceived to be what he is, isn't he? Very quick, very soft touch, bit long with his corners, and getting quite emotional on various radio outbursts we've heard recently with the team, but fair enough, expressing himself. Yeah, I think Albon's very good, not far away from Lando, but I don't think he's been in a good enough team long enough, or in a situation where he's confident enough to be able to develop the sort of rhythm that Lando finds these days, which is unbelievably good. Ocon, yeah, I always rated Ocon. I just think he never really has benefited from a good session or two with Rob Wilson, to be honest. He's just a bit spiky. He's got great car control. He's got pretty good attitude. He's a good guy. But I just think he's a bit spiky in everything he does. He's a sort of a George Russell light, I think, in the way he drives. But he could be sort of, he could be up there with Bottas when Bottas was at his best at Mercedes. I think he's that good. Okay, and there's another who you say was best. This is really head on the chopping block time. Zara Delora, hi Peter, with the second driver champions, in inverted commas. Who would you say was better, Nico Rosberg or Jenson Button? Do I have to answer this? Both drivers, I actually work with them sometimes, and they're not, both of them have got their sides. I always remember Jenson. I was interviewing once him in the bull ring in Suzuka, I think. It was the race after the American Grand Prix at Indy. And he was talking to another crew, and he saw me out of the corner of his eye, and he said, I got a bone to pick with you, or something like that. I'm like, oh, what have I done now? And Nico, just as bad. I mean, Nico, not as bad, as daunting, I think. I mean, Nico put me in my place once when I was doing live TV at the Australian Grand Prix. For the fans at the track, actually. It was the Australian Grand Prix TV thing. And it was Saturday morning, and I was supposed to be down by the sort of turnstiles where the drivers come through with their swipe cards to interview the drivers as they come through, just, hello to the fans or whatever they wanted to say. And Nico came along. It was when he was at Merck, obviously, and Friday he'd had a bit of a problem. I think he'd stopped early or something. So I went up to him and I said, hi, Nico, sort of pointing at the mic saying, live TV, can I have a quick word? And he sort of begrudgingly walked over. I said, so Nico, a bit of a problem yesterday. Do you think is the word that the boys and girls in the garage know what the problem was, and you think you got it solved? And he said, yeah, I think, they worked late last night, but I'm pretty sure we got the problem solved. And then I said, taking the mic back to him, I said to him something along the lines of, so how do you think you're going to go today? How does the car feel? What sort of balance have you got? And he said, that's 2 words, and left. And he didn't answer the question. Live TV. Anyway, so both of those guys, I'm slightly in trepidation as I answer this question. Who would I say was better, Nico Rosberg or Jenson Button? On the face of it, you'd say, in order to win a championship, Jenson Button needed the double diffuser brawn, whereas Nico Rosberg beat Lewis Hamilton in a straight fight in the same car in the same team. And so on that basis, you'd say Nico probably. But Nico, I don't think ever drove a race like Jensen's in Canada, or some of Jensen's great wins in the wet or semi-wet. And I think Jensen had that sublime, which you talked about, that sublime ability, throttle usage on acceleration and lovely footwork. And it stood him in very good stead, providing he had a very good back end. Nico was a different sort of driver because I think he had more versatility in terms of what he could do with the car. I think he had more feel for a shorter corner. And I think he worked very hard he's the first driver ready to since Michael, to maximize all the available technology that is now used by everybody, taken for granted today, even by Lewis Hamilton and Max almost. Not quite to that extent, but I mean, Nico was right on it, and very, very difficult guy to beat from Lewis's perspective. I have to say that Monaco incident when he supposedly went down the escape road at Saint-Devote in qualifying still sits uncomfortably in me. And I know that some people would say, well, it was definitely a real thing, and engineers, that is, and there's no way you can hold that against Nico. I've never felt that comfortable about that. So, I don't know. It's a close race, isn't it? I think we need to answer this question, we need to put them both in i20N Hyundai WCR1 rally cars on SS19 of the Latvian rally as they're going through that mine with that massive jump. Did anybody see that? If you haven't seen it, you need to look at the YouTube shorts of Martin Sesk, who's only in I think it's his first rally with a hybrid WCR1. A young guy, incredibly cool guy, amazing ability to chat and talk, and the eyes, and just a great guy. And he does this jump. Everybody else, Ogier, even Terry, are sort of backing off a fraction, and they're landing, I don't know, whatever it is, 100 meters afterwards. This guy just goes absolutely flat. And the car lands sort of right rear, and massive moment, and keeps it going. Just the most amazing thing. And afterwards he says, oh yeah, it was flat in the WRC2, but yeah, the WRC1 is different. You can say that again. Anyway, I think we should put them both in those Hyundai 120 i20Ns, and then they can go into a stage against one another and see who's quicker. That'd be an interesting result there. I'd like to see it. So Geo Mission says, did Peter already talk about Max no longer sim racing? Well, he did, and he said, yeah, right. Max will say whatever he needs to stop all these stupid questions, and he'll go and do whatever he wants to do when he shuts his bedroom door. Thank you very much. I can't believe Max will do exactly what he's told by anybody. He's been around too long. He's won 3, hopefully soon 4 world championships from his point of view. And I don't think he needs anyone to tell him when to go to bed. So... Darth Lord Raven, Geo Mission, he still can, but not at night. There you go. Yeah, right. Is somebody going to come and check on him at night? So ridiculous, all this. This is where social media and all this public stuff has just gone mad. They really believe that? People believe that when you ask a driver a stupid question, that he's not going to give you a stupid answer? Or not only a driver, anybody really. Most of the questions are so poorly worded that it's inevitable that the driver's going to say something that is going to be misquoted and misused. Bull says, hi Peter, if you look at the betting odds, McLaren is now favoured to win the Constructors. Do you agree? Well, first thing is, who does these betting odds anyway? Do the people that do the betting odds, they're presumably the same people that do the horse racing and all the other stuff. How do they know anything about Formula One? But anyway, I suppose they're reading something and they're saying, oh, well, Adrian Newey's gone, Sergio Perez is crashing, McLaren are finishing 1-2. They've got to be a good bet for the Constructors' Championship. Do I agree? I don't know. I haven't looked at the points recently. I tend not to look at championship points, constructors or drivers, till about Austin. So... ask me that question again. Off the top of my head, I would say no. I would think Red Bull are going to win the Constructors' Championship. Because I think I think Mercedes will start to take some points from McLaren, and Ferrari might as well. But I think Red Bull have a bigger opportunity to keep up sort of an average performance level over the next half of the season. Just my feel, really. No logic to it, I suppose. Felix says, I've just watched the video back and you seem very much assured that Lando was driving like Lewis with his early turn in short corners. Maybe he's lost his short corners. Oh, okay. I don't remember that. And I certainly, if I did say that, I certainly changed my mind very quickly afterwards. So, yeah, sorry about that. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that Lando he could be better if he had a feel more for short corners. If he learned a little bit from Oscar Piastri. Shouldn't be saying that. Yeah, but you're better than I going back through and looking through old videos. So, yeah. What I would have said, and it just probably didn't come out right, is that he has the same feel and touch as Lewis. But I just don't ever remember thinking that he had the same feel for short corners. And he certainly doesn't. And he doesn't execute them today at all at the same level as Lewis. So, and I do distinctly remember saying, wow, you could see there against Lewis how Lando was taking longer corners. And I remember it being Austria. So I don't know how that's happened, really. Maybe some AI's taken place and somebody's dubbed my voice on that video. I was talking to a company today, actually, that want to do some translations for the videos. And you guys out there probably know all this much better than I do, but apparently there's a system now where I can actually, using my voice, and it will still be my voice, I can also speak in Greek, Spanish, Chinese, French, whatever, Polish. And I said, what about the lip sync? They said, oh, well, yeah, I haven't got that sorted yet, but it'll be the same voice. So I'm waiting to see a test run on that. It'd be funny, wouldn't it? I'll do it with my wife, who's Colombian. I'll do the Spanish one. That'll shock her. Kevin Pryor. Perhaps the best chance for there to be an all-British podium is Spa. Be so cool if that happened. Yeah, probably. Yeah, could happen. Equally, yeah, I mean, we're talking George, Lando and Lewis. So, yeah, it could easily happen. Would be interesting, wouldn't it? Has that happened for a long time? I don't know. Have to get the statisticians to come and get involved. Six Hand says, I like Sainz and Alonso as people. Yeah, they're good. I mean, they're very different. Sainz is fairly quiet and relatively humble and polite, and Fernando's a sort of swashbuckling Spanish pirate, isn't he? But we love him for that, and they're both great people. Wonderful to have in Formula One. Either end of the personality spectrum, but yeah, they're both top guys, definitely. Sorry, I take it back. I said about drivers I wouldn't cross the road to watch. I would definitely cross the road to watch Fernando Alonso drive, for sure. Six Hands says Max and Lewis are the better drivers than the rest of the field. Well, that's not what Max thinks. Max thinks that Fernando Alonso is one of the top 5 drivers of all time. So he's presumably ahead of, well, right up there with Max and Lewis, isn't he? Because they got to be amongst the top 5 of all time. There's 3. Not much room now for Jim Clark or Nuvolari or Fangio, but anyway. Six Hands says, what is it with the Lando hype? Well, I guess it's all this social media stuff it does, isn't it, or not? Six Hands, a lot of questions from Six Hands, but anyway, I'll give you this last one. Lando is decent on his day, but his days aren't very Sunday-like, Max. Yeah, I think that's what we're saying, isn't it? You know, he just needs to, if he was Max Verstappen's personality and approach, with the talent that he's got, I think Lando would be, considerably better. More successful, anyway. It's probably a better way of putting it. Praise God says, Formula 1 cars are ridiculously heavy. Yep. We're hoping they're going to be much lighter in 26. Yeah, right. Those batteries, I'm not convinced. Anyway. Scroopy Noopers. Lando needs to see a sports psychiatrist so he can get hold of his emotions. He bottles his opportunities every time. I'm not convinced about sports psychiatrists, to be honest. I think there's much more simple ways of doing it, like stopping social media and becoming a bit tougher and harder, giving one-word answers in interviews, and if necessary, spending the odd day with Rob Wilson. Get the corners a bit shorter. That's all he needs to do. Kevin Pryor says, it's still the bus stop to me. Yeah, well, it is to me too, but it's not really the bus stop shape anymore. It was a nice shape when it was the bus stop. So then Frank Holder. I'm a Ferrari fan, not Oscar, just saying what I've noticed. Okay, there's a few. They're all talking amongst yourselves, which is usually a sign for Windsor. We've heard enough of you. We're going to talk amongst ourselves now. So that's all right with me. So, yeah. Colin James, how important are laps leading the Grand Prix for a driver's development? You mean if you've inherited the lead for 3 laps because you haven't yet made your pit stop? Not very, I don't think. If they are, you're the wrong sort of driver. You should be, very composed and just driving your own race, doing it your own way. And if circumstances have you P1 at a certain point, it's not. If you get overexcited about that, you're kind of overdoing it. You're missing the point, aren't you? I don't know if that's what you're meaning, or do you mean if you're Oscar Piastri, having led the Grand Prix a lot, what will that do for his development? Let's answer that question. I think it'll do a lot. As I say, I think he'll go to the Belgian Grand Prix a changed man now. Even if he might say, well, I don't want to win a race that way. I want to win it. That's probably what he will say. I now want to show that I can win it by beating Lando. And I know how to lead a Grand Prix, and I know how to lead a first lap. He drove a brilliant first lap. Once he'd got out of that first corner, his opening lap was superb. And he's got all the talent to lead from start to finish a Grand Prix, definitely. We've been saying that for a long time, but evidence was obviously confirmed in Hungary. Not your everyday Trav says, Peter, I agree completely about sports psychologists. It would be great to see people get a little harder. So many people are so soft these days and expect everyone else to walk on eggshells. Well, that's right. You've got to get on with it, and you've got to be tough. You've got to be a racing driver. As I said, you can be a professional Formula One driver and do your social media and carry your laptop, and you can be nice and you can be polite and be very helpful to your teammate, and you can pass all the information on that will be to the benefit of the team, and you can be very good with the sponsors and give them all the time they need, and you can go to bed early and do all these things, and you'll be a professional Formula One driver. Or you can be a racing driver, and you can basically say, I don't care about any of that stuff. I just want to drive the car. I want to minimize my sponsorship stuff. I'm not going to do social media. I'm not going to do long interviews. I just want to drive the racing car, and I don't really want to get involved with anybody else. And I'll give you the minimum amount of information that you need in order to get the car sorted for the other guy, and that's it. And don't expect anything more. Bye-bye. I'm out of here. That's more a racing driver's approach. Of course, these days, the team and everything else, we're all one big family, and we all work flat out. All that stuff. You can't be over the top about it, but I'm exaggerating massively, obviously, but I just think there is a bit too much pussyfooting around, and a lot of it is cultivated by social media, and whether you've said something that's appropriate or not, or what does he mean by this, and why has he said that? So here's another super chat. Robin Cornelius, thank you. Can you weigh in on Chauvelin's statement that Lewis Hamilton struggles in qualifying due to his driving style not being suited to this generation of car? Any validity to this? I'm not really sure what Andrew means by that. This generation of car, he probably means the way you have to get the Pirellis operating on the outlaps, and how you use the Pirellis if they're not fully up to temperature, already one of the 3 corners is overheated. Or does he mean he took a long time adapting to the bouncing and the ridiculous handling that we had in 2022, whereas George just jumped in and grabbed it by the scruff of the neck? I don't know what he means by that. I mean, again, that's a typical. That's not typical. I mean, well, it is typical. You hear engineers saying really interesting things like that, but because it's a statement, nobody's ever with a brain has then asked him, so what do you actually mean by that? So it's difficult to know what he actually means by that. Lewis, I'm trying to think when Lewis has struggled. Yeah, I mean, he definitely struggled in Hungary, didn't he? Getting through to Q3. But a lot of that was traffic and positioning of the car, and they were obviously running really, really tight on fuel consumption and fuel in the car, and traffic, how to use the car well. I mean, he is a driver that needs a good front end, basically, and if he doesn't have a good front end, he's an average driver, I think, like most of these great Grand Prix drivers. But providing you give them a decent front end, they can do whatever they need to do with the rest of the car, whether it's Michael Schumacher, Max Verstappen, or Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis maybe doesn't get the best from the front tyres as much as he should have. Maybe you have to be really forceful with brake temperatures and stuff like that on the outlet. I don't know. It's difficult to know what Chauvelin's saying there, other than... But I'm always a bit dubious about people who say this generation of cars, a bit like the Daniel Ricciardo thing, you know, how could he get used to this generation of car? A racing driver is a racing driver, you know, and if everybody happily was with us, who's passed away, if Tazio Nuvolari magically reappeared with exactly as he was when he was at his peak, and you put him in a Mercedes, he would learn to drive it pretty quickly because he has the talent. So would Rosmar, so would Jim Clark, so would Sterling Moss, so would Alberto Ascari. And so does Lewis Hamilton. So I'm not really sure what he means by that. Generation of car. What does that mean? Does he mean cars ever since the Pirelli monopoly, maybe he means that? Michael Delorso. Hungary would be so bad without DRS. Only passes with DRS on the pit straight. I think that's being very... simplistic in your assessment there, Michael, to be honest, with respect, because you'd still get a tow, definitely. You'd be able to do more with that last corner. You wouldn't be so preoccupied about having to sit on the tail of the other guy going in, and you could maybe get a faster exit. And you could still do those passes on the outside of turn 2 because the grip's there, and you would still be in a position to do that. You didn't need the DRS to put you in the position to do that. You could do that anyway. So I disagree with you there, sadly. I like to agree with everybody. So it says, let's celebrate their first Super on a live stream. Thank you very much. And that was that one, yeah. Hello, how do you think Hamilton... This is from Name Shame. Name. Hello. How well do you think Hamilton's driving style matches with the projected Ferrari car in 25 and even the Ferrari this season? That's quite a good question, actually. It's a very good question, because at the moment you'd say if Charles Leclerc's having trouble with that car, for sure Lewis is. And I think that is my response. I think Lewis... I mean, it depends how Mercedes do in the second half. I tend to think that they're going to have quite a good second half and they're going to get it together quite well. Because I can't imagine they're going to be not building on the slight improvements they've made over the last 4 or 5 races. So assuming that, he's going to be going from a relatively high baseline to a Ferrari, which may not be much better in any area. The only area where it's going to be better probably is slow corners, traction, slow corner turn-in. And Lewis will love that for sure. He'll get out of the car at Fiorano and say, "Oh, I can't believe how good this car is. The steering's so nice. Just point the car, goes wherever it needs." But there are no quick corners at Fiorano really. So the first time he goes to a quick corner, if it's the same essence of the car as this year, he's going to think, "It's the Mercedes all over again." So yeah, he could be in for a bit of a shock, I think. But equally, Ferrari may get it together as well in the second half, and they may be able to throw a few more updates at the car. So we call them updates all the time, as if they are going to make the car better. Changes to the car, hopeful updates. Throw some things at the car that might give them a bit more grip and balance without hurting their top speed. Then Lewis will be looking good when he goes there. He'll be enjoying it. But to be honest with you, I think he's so in love with the red overalls, the pasta, the Ferrari road cars, the whole Italian thing, and the warm welcome he's going to get in Italy, that he barely have time to think about the handling of the car, I think. Knowing Lewis, he'll just love it all so much. He loves life, doesn't he? Okay, CNC Thematic. Peter, I really don't understand your criticism of Oscar Piastri's driving into turn one. Can you explain why you have a problem with it? Well, the problem I have is that once he initially turns into the corner and he's carrying much too much speed for the temperature of the front tyres, and he goes into a big understeer slide, as a result of which Lando Norris has to turn to the left to avoid him. And as a result of that, Max Verstappen has to go off track to avoid him. That's my problem. It's one thing to take the lead. It's another thing to do so and stay on your racing line. And now, I've never had a problem, and I should say this, putting aside the sporting regulations, I've never had a problem with the guy on the inside owning the corner and basically using as much of that corner as he wants to, because it's his corner. But since the sporting regulations have been changed, and they basically reward drivers who are on the outside if they get pushed in any way from the center of the track to the outside of the track, which I think is wrong. But since that's been in the sporting regulations, I've always said it's a ridiculous rule, as exemplified by the penalty given to Carlos Sainz at the restart in Australia last year. And on the basis of the penalty that Sainz got, absolutely for sure, Piastri was very, very lucky not to get a penalty. And the reason he didn't, in my opinion, is because he didn't actually hit Lando Norris. And the reason he didn't hit Lando Norris is that Lando moved out of the way for him. And I think that's why I say all bets were off then. Lando played an unbelievable team game there to make sure both cars were not damaged and to give Oscar the room he needed with that slide he had. And if you haven't seen it, look at it again, because it's very clear how much he runs wide in the middle of the corner. And then as Max on the outside, three cars, has to take to the escape road. And the road is wide enough for three cars there. So if you actually extrapolate that sporting regulation and you apply it, Oscar Piastri to Max Verstappen, who is entitled to be there because they want to encourage people to be on the outside these days, Max has to go off the road to avoid Oscar Piastri, in effect. So that's my problem with it. And something should have... And nothing was done, and I think that's a good thing, because I think the whole rule is completely stupid. But from the point of view of the McLaren team, Oscar at that point owed Lando a big favour, because he basically saved him from having any sort of shunt. And the team could have had both cars out at the first corner very, very easily. So there you go. So Michael Dill also, yeah, I was thinking of Seb, and I did correct myself. Thank you for that. There's that thing in Russia, yeah. So Seb passing Charles, there you go. Yeah, got it right finally. Thank you. But it was Seb and Charles, and I remember it was all to do with the top speed and the DRS potentially later on. Why is the Red Bull actually slower now than at the beginning of the season? Sounds of silence. Is it? How do you measure that? Because they're not racing on the same circuit every weekend. I think it's only slower relative to the opposition, isn't it? It's not slower as a car. Are you saying to me that there's computerized evidence out there that if they went back to Bahrain, Max would be slower now than he was at the Grand Prix? I don't think that's the case. It's just that, as I said, and I've said this lots of times, when you have a regulation like this and there are no changes through to the end of 2025, then it stands to reason that if one team got it right in 2023 and makes small incremental changes through over the next 2 years, the other teams that didn't get it right in 23 are eventually going to get it right. And so come back into 24, maybe 25, you're going to have at least 3 teams that have all come to the same solution of how to get these cars ready to work. I think we've got that with 2 cars now. We've got that with the Red Bull and the McLaren. And we may have it maybe with Mercedes or Ferrari by the end of this year. Maybe. That's why, because the regulations haven't changed and there's a finite number of things you can do with these cars. Geo Mission says, Peter, watching Hakkinen and Schumacher at the Spa, the cars were hard to pass back then. Weren't they? I thought that was one of the great races of all time, wasn't it? With the 2000 Belgian Grand Prix. Mika using the traffic, Ricardo Zonta zapping Michael down the inside. So that just is a good example of why you don't need anything else. You don't need anything artificial. You just need the toe. And I think that's a great shame that we've lost that ability. Is there a year's rules you would roll the cars back to? Oh, is there a year's rules you would roll the cars back to? Well, certainly pre-DRS for sure. And then I'd go back to 964-3-2-1 point scoring system for sure. I'd go back to garlands instead of medals on the podium. I'm trying to think what else I would go back to that I don't like. I mean, dear Chris Amon, one of my dear friends, Nigel Roebuck's greatest friend, no longer with us, great racing brain, even to the last was saying get rid of the arrow on the car. So I know it's not possible, and the teams today would never do it because it's such a big sign writing opportunity for them, for advertising. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we didn't have arrow? Wouldn't that be wonderful? We had suspension again. Oops, going too far into the past. Better not say these things. Max taking a grid place penalty for the new thing. Can third be his best finish? No, I think, as I said, if he has got a 10 place because they're going to do it's a logical place. If a team has got to take a penalty for an engine, extra engine, internal combustion engine, then Spa's the place to do it because it is relatively easy to overtake at Spa, and you can win from certainly Max, any quick driver in a quick car can win from P10 at Spa if they have a good race, the strategy's perfect, and the car goes as it should go. Definitely. I mean, probably third would be a good result for him, but that's on the assumption it's going to be a normal race. If it's wet qualifying, dry race, you might have some people at the front who could be very easy to pass in the dry, and some people might set the car up in qualifying just to qualify well in the wet, and that may not be so good in the dry in terms of ride heights and stuff. So Kevin Pryor says, I remember Hamilton's amazing defence from Rosberg, Bahrain 2014. Yeah, he is good. He's good. I mean, most of these great drivers are good in defence. Nigel was unbelievable in defence, actually, as well. What can I say? Hamza Chowdhury says, apologies if you've already answered this question, but what are your thoughts on Red Bull giving Max a bedtime for race weekend since he was up till 3 a.m. sim racing? Well, good luck with that is all I can say. As if Max Verstappen's going to obey all those rules. What are they going to do? Have a bloke come into the room every 5 minutes? Or a girl to say, are you asleep yet, Max? I mean, it's all nonsense, isn't it? It's all good for the TV show, but nothing's real. It's my view. If Max wants to stay up all night doing his thing, he will. He's that sort of guy, and that's why he's so good. So I think we need to call it a day there, folks. Shall I do one more? Let's try and find one. Jack. This is from Jack. If short corner drivers tend to be quicker, why was Senna so quick? Because Senna was the epitome of everything that he did. It's not to say he couldn't have been even better had he driven a little bit more like Alan Prost into corners, and had he not had that weird throttle blipping thing that he always had. I think he would have been quicker had he got rid of that as well. But he was so good, he was so precise in so many other areas. I think the thing about drivers who don't turn in earlier, if they have extraordinary ability anyway in terms of softness and feel for the surface of the road and judgment and precision and coordination, if they have all that, the only way they're going to get beaten is if they've got a driver of similar quality who is taking slightly shorter corners. And we saw that with Prost. Senna was quick, but Prost did beat him on occasions. And Nigel Mansell beat him on occasions. Okay, not in the same car, but there were occasions when Nigel was right there with him and beat him. So a short corner driver, a great short corner driver will always beat a longer corner driver over a season. But in terms of individual races, you've got to get everything perfect. And Senna was pretty good at getting everything perfect, probably better than anybody I think I've ever seen at getting everything perfect so consistently and so often, and doing everything perfectly to what he wanted to do. And that was his greatest quality. But even he would say, you know, he could have been better. Because I spoke to him about that throttle thing, and he said he really wanted to get rid of it and couldn't. So it wasn't as if Senna was the fastest guy in the world in his time. Nigel could take it to him, and so could Alan Prost at McLaren. Ricky says Alonso won both his titles in cars that were not dominant over the season. Alonso then took the fight to Vettel when Ferrari were third best, something Hamilton has never done or ever will. This just seems a bit odd. I think the Michelin-tired Benetton was a pretty good car. Dominant? No, it wasn't dominant, but, you know, why do we have to talk about dominance? Alonso then took the fight to Vettel, who wasn't doing a very good job at Ferrari, got to say, when Ferrari were third best. But I don't see the bit there saying, and then he drove the Ferrari team apart because he wanted more attention and he felt Felipe Massa was getting too much. I don't see that in your comment there. So that's seems a bit over the top. Anyway, here's a good one to end with. Octay Yilmaz, Jim Clark is probably the most gifted driver. Yes, what a great way to end this. And it's next year, remember. We're all going to have to collectively decide how we're going to celebrate the greatest achievement in the history of Formula One all time. And that is Jim Clark's achievement of winning the 65 Indy 500 and the Formula One World Championship in the same year. So forget all these stats about podiums, wins, championship. I want to see the next driver who's going to do that. Thanks so much for joining me. Thank you very much indeed to our partners, to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and of course to Track Ninja as well. Thank you, the viewer, for your support. Great to be able to do these live streams. Without you, it wouldn't be happening. So wonderful to do it. I'll be doing our usual videos after the Belgian Grand Prix, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Let's hope that it's all okay. I always get slightly, you know, clammy palm going into the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, but anyway, that's just me, I guess. And then I'm going to have a slight break because we're going to Finland the following weekend for the Rally of the Thousand Lakes, which I'm really looking forward to, where I'm going to be doing the shakedown run. I think I've said this, but I just love saying it. I'm doing the shakedown run with Terry Noble in his i20N Hyundai. I hope to see you after that. I'm really, really looking forward to see. I'll tell you why I'm so enthusiastic about it, because I love a form of motorsport where going sideways is quick and car control is rewarded. And those four-wheel drive 500 horsepower WCR1 are just brilliant cars. And the car, I mean, it's not only Terry, obviously there's some brilliant guys out there, but I just love his approach. And I can't wait for that. I'm really looking forward to that. So anyways, that. And then we got the opening of the Formula One exhibition in London, which is going to be brilliant as well. Looking forward to that, going to that. And yeah, so much going on, non-stop. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for being part of the show. Take care. See you on